And welcome back to A.R. Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I am A.R. Mirabal, and today I am joined by Garrett Jones, the man behind GKJ Publishing, the man behind Async Rain, a phenomenal book series we're about to get into, and also the podcast host of Storytellers. We're going to talk all about that and much more, but without any further ado, the man himself, Garrett, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How you doing?
I'm phenomenal. So diving right into it, how did it all just start for you? Were you a podcast person first, kind of just going into reading aspects and then aspired to writing? Were you writing and then ventured into the podcasting? Which was the chicken or the egg?
For me, it all started with the writing because that's the thing I love to do. I actually started off creating a lot of these characters when I was in high school. I was a big fan of comic books, and I still am to this day. Years down the line, I'm still I just got a new graphic novel off of Amazon yesterday. So I'm constantly reading this stuff, and it's something I love to do. It's one of my preferred genres, and so I figured, I wanted to be a comic book writer and creator, and I thought that would be something I could do. I started designing this whole slew of characters from middle school all through high school, and it got to the point where after I graduated high school, I realized that I couldn't draw to save my life. I'm not that much of an artist. I'll draw, I'll doodle, and I will constantly do something, but I'm not good. I can't draw feet. I can't draw faces unless the character's wearing a helmet or some kind of mask.
Well, then always draw characters with helmets on.
That's what I tend to do. Power Rangers are really fun for me because it's just a helmet. So I got into writing, and I figured instead of making it a modern day superhero story, I figured my characters would be better suited for medieval fantasy. And I just started adapting them about 21 years ago. I was living in Japan at the time, and great heaps of inspiration while living there. I was there for about a year, and then about a couple months before I came home, I started writing, and I started developing the story, and I had plans for just 3 books, and eventually it just kind of morphed and evolved and grew, and I realized I had way more than 3 books on my hands. In fact, elements from the book that I'm developing right now and getting ready to put into publication saw their original iteration 21 years ago in that first draft. So there are things that I published in the first few books that were part of that original story, stuff that's coming out now that was part of that original story. So it's expanded, it's evolved. The stuff with YouTube and my podcasting, that all came about just over the last few years. It's kind of a natural progression of trying to put myself out there. I was doing blogs on my website, and I wasn't getting a whole lot of traction with that. And so I did a video one time, and that got a lot of traction. I'm like, you know what? I'll just do videos from now on. And so I set up a YouTube channel, and I started doing it. And at first, the YouTube channel was all about promoting my books and talking about the events that I was going to be doing and what I had coming out. And eventually it just kind of organically became something else. And now I do top 10 book recommendations. I do author interviews with other authors. I do creative writing tips. And then the Storytellers podcast, that actually kind of evolved out of frustration. Like the very first season was called Writing Is. And that was kind of a response to something my brother had said to me. He tried to tell me that being a writer is not really a job. And this was during a time when he was working as a personal trainer. And so, my response to him was, dude, you're a glorified gym rat. You wear shorts to work, which I don't have a problem with people who wear shorts to work, but it's like you have no idea just how challenging being a writer is. It's very hard work. Even just to work, write, 300 to 500 words per day can be a
A
challenge for
challenge,
anybody
yeah.
who's ever tried it. And so the Storytellers podcast came out of that. And so I spent that first season breaking down what, my idea of what writing is. And I used gardening as kind of the metaphor. And then the second season talked about the dangers of being a writer. It's a very dangerous work. Not the fact that you can, I mean, well, some parts of the world, yes, you could literally lose your life, but other in another sense, it's very makes you vulnerable, leaves you open to a lot of criticism and judgment. I mean, when I tell people I'm a writer, their first response is, "Oh, okay, good for you." Uh, and it's once they start getting into understanding what that means, then they're a little bit more supportive. But then the going into the third season really kind of launched during the pandemic, and I decided, you know what, how cool would it be to have audiobook style recordings of short stories and poems and segments from other books. And I met a lot of really cool authors doing that. And so like I would do a little bit of an intro. I would record whatever they submitted to me as an audio recording, kind of similar to an audiobook or a radio drama or something like that. And then I would interview them if they're open to it. The fourth season was actually used as kind of a catharsis for me because my grandmother died right at the tail end of 2020. And so we didn't get to have a funeral for her right away. In fact, we didn't have one until this past June. So 18 months after she had passed away. So I used that fourth season of Storytellers as an opportunity to go through the grieving process. And it was actually, I want to say, some of my best work as a podcaster, because a lot of people commented that they were able to sympathize and empathize with it because they've probably been there to some extent too.
My God. And do you feel like the situation with your grandmother that had any influence on your writing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Not that it had a negative impact. My grandmother was always really, really supportive. In fact, I gave her a copy of my first book, and bless her heart, she tried to read it. English was not her first language. And so she tried to read it, and she got maybe about a third of the way through, I think. And so but she was always very supportive. And so when she passed, I wanted to do something that would honor her. So the book that I've got coming out, soon for the next book in the series, it's dedicated to her, in her memory. And like I said, the whole fourth season of Storytellers, it was all about talking about my experiences and my memories and growing up and having her be a part of my life. One or two of my cousins got involved and shared some of his thoughts and his memories, which was great. But it was more, like I said, just an opportunity to get through that grieving process and to celebrate her life without breaking down and just completely losing it.
My God. I can only imagine the type of impact that would have on your character development, just everything. I mean, one thing that caught my eye immediately was the way that you developed your characters all throughout high school. So you developed characters before developing a world around them. You were just fascinated on character development, like what makes a person tick. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of developed characters in the world simultaneously. Characters are people are a product of their environment just as much as the environment is impacted by people. And so I really like to get into the psychology and the background of my characters and kind of find what makes them what makes them tick, but also to see how they interact with the world around them. So there's a character in book one. His name is Asher. And Asher is one of the heroes of book one, and he becomes the central character of book three. And this is a character that was, he was orphaned. He was raised as he was raised at a monastery from a very young age, and while he has developed, he's learned from the monks that he works around and has been raised with. His personality towards them is really harsh. Like, a couple of them did not like him. They thought he was some kind of unholy creature, and so and it has to do with part of his past that he doesn't even know about. And so but because he was refusing to convert to their religion, they took it upon themselves to force him. And so they strapped him to they didn't nail him or anything, but they tied him to a crucifix, and they tortured him overnight until the high priest at the monastery showed up and is like, "What the heck are you guys doing?" Smacked him around and drove him off. And so part of his environment, while he grew up in this environment, he's very much familiar with it. He likes being in the library. He likes to read. He's very much a homebody, but at the same time, he wants out. He wants to go and explore. He wants to visit the rest of the world. And there's kind of this hardness in his heart about faith matters. But then over the course of the story, his entire perspective changes because come to find out he is part of the celestial race that religion actually worships, and he had no idea. So in part he's impacted by the environment and where he's raised, but he also himself has an impact on that environment.
That's phenomenal. And how, especially the wanderlust that comes from the character, do you think that did that come from you? Did that come from a person that you know or a close friend?
It's some of it comes from me because that character Asher, and there's another character in the book one. His name's Gavin. Both of them were based off of myself to some extent, but in the initial design of the initial writing, the characters were so similar, I had to give them something else to kind of differentiate. And so there were some tweaks to their personalities here and there, and I think they got fleshed out a little bit better than what I had initially intended. I had some great feedback from some people that were helping me develop the editing, and but some of that wanderlust does come from me because I do enjoy travel. I hate flying, ironically enough, but I do enjoy traveling. I do enjoy going places. It just, I have to be really in the mood to do it.
I actually love flying. I don't know why I'm the one weirdo. It's not too bad of an experience, honestly. I always feel like it adds anything.
Most of the time it's not. The last time I flew anywhere was 2019. I flew to Hawaii, and it's only 5 hours from LA to Kauai, but the entire time I'm sitting there, I was working on book 5. Actually, I was writing and developing the story for this next book, and all of a sudden my Apple Watch beeps at me, and I look at the face, and it says, "Your heart rate's sitting at a resting 120. Are you having a heart attack?" I'm like,
"What?
No, I'm just panicking." I get super anxious on flights. So yeah, I don't. It's kind of a control thing, and so yeah, I don't fly well. I don't travel well. But you put me on a train, you put me on a bus, you put me in a car, I'm fine. I'll crash out. I'll relax. I'm great. It's just I don't relax on planes ever. I've done the flight from London, from LAX to London Heathrow twice. It's an 11.5 hour flight, and I'm awake the entire time.
Wow. Wait, LA to LA, LAX to Heathrow is 11 hours?
11 and a half hours, depending on whether or not you've got a tailwind.
Yeah, that's not too bad. I've done I've
No.
done Boston to Heathrow, which is like 7 hours, but depending on the air, like the how you can travel, it can easily be around like 12 if you have like layovers and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
I've done the layover bit. It's not a fun, it's not the best ride. I definitely prefer like the six, just take a nap, watch a couple movies. But the thing about travel really sparked my ears because it immediately made me think of something we were talking about right before we hit record, which was the whole thing that you
Mhm.
develop your own language. So I feel like there has to be a part of like wanderlust and liking to travel for that to happen. So how did that come to be? How did you get into the whole idea? How did you go token on us?
Um, I like languages. I've studied a lot of them, uh, just through just going to school and stuff like that. So, in my first exposure to other languages actually comes from my grandmother. My grandmother was from Italy, came here after World War II. And so my initial exposure to other languages other than English was Italian. My dad is, for the most part, pretty fluent. My mom understands, doesn't speak as well, but so that was part of how I grew up. So I grew up hearing words and phrases in Italian mixed alongside English, and eventually what came about is, as I was getting into high school, I knew I was required to take foreign language. And unfortunately, the only thing that they offered at the time was Spanish. I was kind of being a bit of a rebellious teenager. And my mom really didn't help with that because, she suggested that the high school put together other programs as well, because the only thing that they offered other than Spanish was sign language. And there weren't a whole lot of options. And she threatened to send me to the University for Foreigners in Perugia, Italy, for a year, which the language equivalent would have been like 2.5 to 3 years worth of language credit for high school.
Oh, you should have done that.
And I was almost tempted to, and but eventually what ended up happening is they, as a response to my mom harassing the school, they started a French program. And so I took French for 2 years in high school. I did really well with it. And then shortly after I graduated is when I did my year abroad in Japan. So going from learning little bits of Italian and then learning 2 years of French, uh, to jumping into trying to learn Japanese is a huge shift, because that language is nothing close to anything Latin based.
No way.
And so, I mean, because you're aside from the speaking, you're learning like 4 or 5 different writing styles simultaneously, um, because they're all used in a mix. And then I was having to learn culture and stuff like that. And their whole school year structure is different from ours here in the United States, because we start in August or September with the beginning of our academic year. They start in the middle of March. And it's insane. So like I actually showed up in the middle of a school year when I was there, because I showed up in August. And so I showed up as a second year student, learning. And then by the time I came home, I was in the middle of my third year at the school I was attending. So I graduated here. I was doing Japanese, and participating in a Japanese high school over there. And then in college, because again, options were limited, I took Spanish. At this point, I decided, you know what, I actually need to take Spanish. I'm a little bit older. I'm a little bit more mature. Spanish is a prominent language in California. It would make
Mm.
sense to have something like that under my belt. And Spanish and Italian are so similar that I was actually able to grab a hold of it pretty well, because shortly after that second semester, I went and visited family in Italy with my parents, and so I was able to quickly convert some of the Spanish that I had learned into Italian.
Mm.
Wine helped, um, but then but then several years after that, when I was working on a master's degree, I was required part of it required me to do a couple of foreign languages, because it was a Bible degree.
Hmm.
And so when you're studying for something like that, you're required to take Old Testament Hebrew and New Testament Greek. And while I had been learning Greek on my own, the Hebrew was harder to come by. So I took a semester of Old Testament Hebrew. I'm still able to read it fairly well. I get a little confused with some of the vowel markers, but yeah, so at this point I've studied French, Italian, some German, um, Hebrew, Japanese, Greek, and so what I've taken that love for languages and trying to understand them, and I've incorporated them into what I've done with my writing. So like the elves in my series, their language is based on French and Italian. It's just this kind of this merger of the two languages.
Hmm.
So what I'll do is I'll put together a phrase and translate it in Google Translate in both languages, and then I'll just kind of mix accent marks and letters to where it works. The dwarves were based on German. There's another country that I have in my series called Ronso, and their language is based on Greek and a blend of Greek and Japanese. In fact, I use elements from both of those cultures as far as like the aesthetic, in the costuming, in the architecture, in the culture.
Wow.
You wouldn't think that they would blend well, but they actually do, surprisingly. And then like I take a practical approach. So like dragons and elves and vampires and humans are all very much interconnected in my series, and so the language that is spoken by vampires in my series is based on Castilian Spanish, because they have that kind of lisping sound, or that lisping quality as the tongue presses against the teeth. And I figured these are characters with fangs. Of course, they're going to have that kind of a quality in their language. So I use that as the basis. And it's been fun because then I can come up with these words, and you see some crossover between like elf language and vampires, or elf language and humans, and it's really kind of fun.
So, without getting into any spoilers, because the book series is out now, all the info will be in the description and the bio and the banisters underneath when you're watching on YouTube. So make sure to buy it now. Out on Amazon. Worth the read. I mean, just the world building, all the characters, the different languages. It's so much to consume. And what number are you on now? You said you were working on book 5. So where is the book series number at
So
currently?
right now, there's 4 books in the series. The first is called The Heirs of Menenias, and it kind of gets the ball rolling with this whole series. Menenias was this warlord. He was the first half elf, half human, half elf, and he tried to eradicate the dragons. Comes really close before he's put down. And so the prologue kind of gives you his downfall, and then the rest of the book picks up in 250 years after that, and so you're introduced to the characters that are going to be the heroes for the series, or part of the series, as well as antagonists who are going to be popping up. And so I don't like to do one and done as far as like villains. That seems to work really well for movies or for TV shows. I don't like that. Because my background is in reading comic books and graphic novels. I want to have kind of this situation where something might get introduced in book 1, but you're not going to see it pop up again until book 2 or book 3. It layers these seeds of anticipation and foreshadowing. That way you can see something coming up down the line. You're like, oh, that's where that connects. Okay, cool. And so the heirs of Menenias are simply trying to rekindle their father's legacy, and then the books progress from there. So book 2, which is called The Destiny of Dragons, picks up literally right where book 1 leaves off. some of the same dialogue. And then book 2 and 3 overlap. So book 2 starts off like right where book 1 ends, and then book 3 happens concurrently with book 2. So there are scenes that pop up in both books shown from different perspectives, same dialogue, same characters, but you're seeing it from a different angle. And then book 4, which is called Hadrian Corvus of Farfell, it takes one of the secondary characters that's introduced in book 2 and makes him a prominent protagonist. And that one's a lot of fun because it actually takes place outside of the Five Kingdoms, which is what Isink Ran means. It takes place on this island province and deals with a lot of he's demon hunting the entire time. Doesn't realize it at first, but he's demon hunting. And so part of it explores his own history and his background. Part of it explores the celestial race that Asher's a part of and some of their history with humanity. And then the whole point of book 4 is it expands the world a little bit more, because you start realizing, I mean, there's references to other countries and other places, but as each book pops up, I wanted to explore the world and get a little bit more of what that world looks like. And then, so like with book 5, while book 5 does take place mostly in the Five Kingdoms, about a third of it takes place in another country called Ronso, which I've mentioned earlier, and so we actually get to see that empire. We get to see what their countryside looks like and what the landscape is like, the architecture. We get to see the culture and the language a lot more, and just how vast it is. But then there's another region that is talked about in the first 4 books that is explored in book 5 called the Frostlands, and it's basically this huge Arctic wilderness north of where the elves live, and so we get to see that on full display in this book as well.
My God, this is more in depth than Game of Thrones, especially when you consider all the different languages being spoken too. I mean, it is insane, like how you even were able to compress all that into a story. But it's there, folks. You need to get it. If this is anywhere near your vibe, fantasy vibe, if you even kind of like Game of Thrones, get on this book series now. I am just floored. This is amazing. Well, unfortunately, near the end of the podcast episode now, so I want to go ahead and turn it over to you. Is there anything that you want to shout out? Any things that you haven't given light to that you want to before we cut out? This is the time.
Yeah. So right now there's a sale going on my website. So if you go to archivesofthefivekingdoms.com, you can, there's a little bumper that pops up as soon as you land, and it gives you a code for 15% off of your purchase. So if you go onto my website, you purchase the books directly from me, you'll get 15% off of your total purchase. Books usually run about $15 a piece. So for 4 books, that's $60, $15 off is a little over $5.50, something like that. So it's definitely worth doing. You're also helping a great, also helping an indie author, make some income. But if Amazon's more your speed, you can order from them as well. Just the code won't work for them. But I'm also a part of another podcast called War of the Stars. I'm a big Star Wars fan, and this is a Star Wars podcast. And so this coming Monday, the 19th of December, we are going to be doing our last episode for the year. We're going to be taking a break for the holidays, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be live streaming as much as we can with the Star Wars holiday special. Hopefully we don't get demonetized or flagged on YouTube with that, but we have a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool episodes. We just did an episode on this last week where we were talking about our top 5 characters from the expanded universe that we want to port over to the Disney Star Wars.
Revan, without a doubt. Well, as far as I can and goes anyway. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars. I even played like the MMO for a while, but My God, folks, you need to hop on this now. Everything that he just talked about will also be the links in the bios if you didn't catch any of that. And rewind it. Just do whatever you can to support and hop on and listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, and above all, buy the books. And like you said, 50% on the website. That's not too bad. That's not too bad at all. I can say $15 on anything, 15% on anything, I'll take it. So make sure to go ahead, hop on, do what you can, support an indie author, just like you said. And that is it, folks. We will be back next week with another creative, another author, another artist, and we're going to be talking about what we love. Until then, peace out.